ambulance immediately! A young girl is having a severe allergic reaction! Hurry! Please, just hurry!
The restaurant had gone completely silent. The specific silence that only happens when 40 people simultaneously realize a child is dying in front of them. And no one knows what to do. A woman was screaming for anyone with medical training. A man in a tailored suit was on his knees on the floor. His daughter's small body cradled against his chest, her lips already turning a color no parent should ever have to see, her throat closing around a breath that would not come. The restaurant's manager was on the phone with emergency services, repeating an address with a shaking voice. A waiter stood frozen holding a tray he'd forgotten he was carrying. Then a girl in a faded yellow raincoat pushed through the restaurant's front door. Nobody stopped her. Nobody even fully registered her at first. She was maybe 10 years old, thin in the way children get when meals aren't guaranteed. With rain-soaked sneakers and a backpack, she never let more than an arm's length away from her body. She had been sitting under the restaurant's awning 3 minutes earlier, waiting out the storm when she heard the first scream through the glass and, without any clear reason she could have explained afterward, had gotten up and walked straight inside. She crossed the room before anyone thought to stop her, knelt beside the father and his daughter, unzipped the front pocket of her backpack, and pulled out a small yellow injector pen that most of the adults in that restaurant had never seen outside of a pharmacy display. What happened in the next 90 seconds would be described later, by 3 separate witnesses in 3 noticeably different ways, though all 3 agreed on exactly how it ended. Before we continue, if you believe that courage has no address and kindness wears no uniform, please like this video, subscribe to The Overlooked, and share this with someone who needs to believe in people again today. The girl's name was Nora, and she was 10 years old, and she had been living out of a car with her mother for the past 11 months. Parked most nights in a rotation of quiet lots her mother had mapped out with the same careful precision some people apply to far less desperate problems. Nora's mother, Bridget, had lost her apartment the previous winter after a layoff turned into a longer stretch of unemployment than either of them had planned for. And the 2 of them had spent the months since navigating a life built around shelters that filled up early. Library bathrooms used as makeshift mornings. And a backpack Nora carried everywhere that held, among a change of clothes and a photograph of her grandmother, the single item that would matter more than anything else in her possession on that particular Tuesday, an epinephrine auto-injector. Expired by 4 months, but as Nora had learned from someone who mattered enormously to this story, still almost certainly effective. Nora carried that injector because her younger brother, Milo, had a severe peanut allergy. One that had nearly killed him at age 3 during a reaction so fast and so frightening that Nora, 7 years old at the time, had watched a paramedic save her brother's life with a device she'd never forgotten the shape of. Milo now lived with their aunt 2 states away, a temporary arrangement Bridget had agreed to during the hardest stretch of their housing instability. A separation that had broken something in Nora she rarely spoke about, but that had also left her, strangely, still carrying an injector meant for a brother who was no longer beside her, because Bridget could not bring herself to stop packing it, and Nora could not bring herself to ask why. She had read everything she could find about anaphylaxis in the 2 years since Milo's reaction, driven by a specific, urgent need to understand exactly what had almost taken her brother from her, and by a fear that had never fully released its grip, the fear of watching it happen again, and not knowing what to do, what Nora did not yet know. Standing outside that restaurant in the rain 3 minutes before she walked in, was that the girl currently dying on the floor 20 feet away from her was named Sophie. She was 6 years old, and she had eaten a single bite of a dessert that the kitchen had. Through a communication error, later traced to a rushed shift change, prepared with a garnish containing crushed peanuts, despite the allergy clearly noted on the family's reservation. Sophie's father, Adrian Cole, the founder of a mid-sized technology company that had gone public 2 years earlier, had left her EpiPen in the car in the rush of getting a table, a 15-second decision he would spend the rest of his life replaying. Certain right up until the moment Nora knelt beside him that he was about to watch his daughter die in front of 40 strangers because of exactly that 15-second choice. Nora did not ask permission. She had learned, somewhere in the 2 years since Milo's reaction, that asking permission in a moment like this cost time nobody dying could spare. She pressed the injector firmly against Sophie's outer thigh, held it exactly 10 seconds the way she had read and reread in a pamphlet whose corners had gone soft from handling, and stepped back to let the medication work, her hands shaking now that the decision itself was already behind her. The room held its breath for what felt, to everyone present, considerably longer than the actual 90 seconds it took. Sophie's breathing began to ease first. Oh, the horrible tightness in her small chest, loosening enough for air to move again, followed by color slowly returning to lips that had gone the wrong shade entirely. She started crying, a real, full-throated child's cry that every adult in that restaurant would later describe as the single greatest sound they had ever heard, because it meant she was breathing well enough to make it. Adrian Cole did not immediately understand what had just happened. He looked up from his daughter's face to the girl kneeling beside them, soaked from the rain, still holding the spent injector in one hand, and said, "Who are you? Where did that come from?" Nora said quietly, "My brother has the same allergy. I always carry one. I'm sorry it's expired, but I think it still worked." Before we continue further, we want to pause here, because what Nora did in that restaurant is the most visible part of this story. But the Overlooked wants you to know what made it possible. 3 years before that Tuesday, a pharmacist named Walter Higgins had started quietly setting aside expired but recently lapsed epinephrine samples from his pharmacy's return bin. Samples that pharmaceutical regulations required him to remove from sale, but that remained, by any honest medical understanding, very likely still effective for months past their printed date. He did not advertise this. He simply kept a small box under the counter, and when a parent came in visibly struggling with the cost of a new prescription, quietly offered what he had, instead of turning them away. Bridget had come in 11 months earlier, newly unemployed, terrified about how she'd afford Milo's next refill before the separation. Walter had given her 2 injectors without charge and without comment. 18 months before that Tuesday, a school nurse named Deborah Alcott had run an allergy safety assembly at the elementary school. Nora technically wasn't enrolled in that semester, since the family's housing instability had briefly interrupted her registration, but Deborah let her sit in anyway in the back row. Because a colleague had mentioned the girl often lingered near the school building in the mornings with nowhere else to be, Deborah demonstrated slowly and carefully exactly how to administer an auto-injector, exactly how long to hold it, exactly what to expect in the following minutes. She never learned Nora's last name. Nora never forgot a single detail of that demonstration. 6 months before that Tuesday, a librarian named Priya Nasser had let Nora sit in the reading room past, closing on nights when the family's car felt too small and too cold to face yet, never asking why a child arrived alone so often, simply leaving the medical reference section unlocked, and on the coldest nights, leaving a granola bar on the reading table where Nora would find it without either of them acknowledging it directly. None of these 3 people were in that restaurant. All of them were. This is what the Overlooked believes, that every quiet act of decency travels further than the person who gave it will ever fully know. Walter's box under the counter, Deborah's back row assembly, Priya's unlocked reading room. They all walked into that restaurant with Nora, folded invisibly into the 90 seconds that saved a stranger's life. Adrian Cole found Nora and her mother in the restaurant's parking lot 20 minutes later. Once Sophie had been examined by paramedics and cleared to go home with strict follow-up instructions, still shaking with the particular delayed adrenaline of a parent who has just watched the worst thing almost happen, he asked Nora where she lived. Nora, glancing at her mother, told him the truth. The specific unglamorous truth of a car and a rotation of parking lots and a housing situation that had been unraveling for 11 months. Adrian did not respond with pity or with the particular discomfort some people display when hardship arrives close enough to feel real. He asked 2 more questions instead. What did Bridget need to stabilize her family? What did Nora need to keep learning the things she clearly already loved learning? Asterisk. What followed was not charity, and Adrian was careful, from the very first conversation, to frame it as exactly that, an investment, he told Bridget. in a family that had already demonstrated under the worst possible pressure. Exactly the kind of resourcefulness and quiet courage his own company spent. Enormous resources trying to identify and cultivate in adults twice Nora's age. He helped Bridget secure stable housing within the month, close enough to Milo's aunt that the family could begin working toward reunification, and funded. At Nora's own specific request, once she understood a little of what his foundation supported, a scholarship program at her new school focused on health sciences, education for kids who'd shown exactly her kind of self-taught curiosity. 4 years later, Nora was 14, thriving academically, and had rejoined her brother Milo under one roof for the first time in 2 years. The family's stability rebuilt from a foundation. Adrian's help had made possible, but that Bridget and Nora had done the harder, the slower work of actually constructing themselves. Nora had begun volunteering at Walter Higgins's pharmacy on weekends, not because anyone asked her to, but because she'd tracked down the pharmacist who'd once quietly kept her family afloat and had shown up one Saturday simply to say thank you. A visit that turned into a standing weekend arrangement neither of them had planned. The night before her first day of high school, Nora sat at her family's kitchen table, an actual kitchen table, in an actual apartment. A detail she still occasionally paused to appreciate in a way most 14-year-olds never had reason to, and wrote 3 letters. One to Walter Higgins, who she now saw every Saturday but had never fully told what his quiet box under the counter had actually made possible. One to Deborah Alcott, the school nurse, tracked down through the district office 2 years after that assembly. One to Priya Nasser, the librarian, still working the same reading room every evening. Deborah wrote back within the week, saying she had run that same allergy assembly for 11 years, and this was the first time she had ever learned what happened afterward for any child who'd sat in on it. Priya did not write back, but the library director mentioned to Nora months later that Priya had printed the letter and kept it taped inside her desk drawer, where she still saw it every single day she came to work. Never count out a family because of where they're sleeping tonight. Never assume that hardship erases capability. Never mistake a soaked raincoat and a worn backpack for a small life. And never forget that the thing which saves a stranger's life might have started as a box kept quietly under a pharmacy counter by someone who simply could not bring herself to throw expired medicine away. If this story moved you, please like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to believe in people today. Subscribe to The Overlooked for more stories of courage, resilience, and the quiet human decisions that change everything. Because kindness does not always arrive with a title or an address. Sometimes it arrives in a soaked yellow raincoat, carrying a backpack with an expired injector inside it. And it stays when everyone else is frozen.